This Iyun Shiur is going to focus on the first Tosafos in Meseches Berachos. This is Tosafos MeEimasai, and this Tosafos is going to involve a machlokas between Rashi and Tosafos. And within Tosafos itself, there's going to be two shitas. There's the shita of Rabbeinu Tam, and there's the shita of the Ri. And so let's get started over here to analyze what this machlokas is all about. Now, Rashi, we'll start off with Rashi over here. So Rashi says, Ad sof ha'ashmora harishona. This is going on the part of the Mishnah which says when the end time, really the beginning and the end time of Krias Shema is. We're going to be focusing on the beginning time of Krias Shema over here. So Rashi here says, Shlish halayla, this was the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, that you only have until 1/3 of the night to say Krias Shema, Kedem Mefarish b'Gemara, like it says in the Gemara, Misham va'elach avar zman. Once it's after that period of time, the time has passed. The lo mikri su zman shchiva. It's no longer called the time of lying down, like the pasuk says, uveshachbecha v'lo karinan be b'shachbecha. It's not called b'shachbecha. Umekame hachi nami. Here's the key part of Rashi. Rashi says before this time period as well. Okay, so meaning before the time period of essentially Tzeis HaKochavim as well, Lav Zman Shchiva, it's not the time of Shchiva. Lefikach, therefore, Hakore Kodem Lachein Lo Yotzi Yedei Chovaso. If a person reads Krias Shema before this time, the time that the Mishnah says is the time the Kohanim are Nichnasim Lecho B'Trumasim, which we say is Tzeis HaKochavim, according to the Mishnah, you're not Yotzei the Chiv of Krias Shema, you cannot read earlier than Tzeis HaKochavim. So then Rashi says, Im kain, if so, Lama Korono Sababeis HaKnesses. Why do we read Shema at all when we're in Shul? Meaning Rashi presumably is asking that in his time they would daven much earlier than Tzeis HaKochavim. They would daven Ma'ariv early like we do. And therefore the question is, why would they read Shema so early if you're not Yotzei anyway? And so Rashi says, Kedei lamod b'tfila mitoch divrei Torah. The only reason they read Shema early was in order to begin their tefillah, begin their Shmona Esrei after learning some Divrei Torah. So essentially you read Shema, Shema counts as Divrei Torah, and that's your introduction to davening. This is what's learned in the Braisa, in Brachos, in the Yerushalmi. And then Rashi concludes, and therefore Chova Aleinu Lekrosa Mishatechshach, we have an obligation to read Krias Shema after it becomes dark outside, after Tzeis HaKochavim, over Krias Parsha Rishona Sh'Adam Kore Al Mitaso Yatsa. With reading the first parsha of Krias Shema that we do, what we call Krias Shema Al Amita, a person is Yotzei his Chiyuv. Tosafos is going to ask a number of questions on Rashi, but before we actually get into the questions that Tosafos asks on Rashi, it's important to point out that Rashi seems pretty straightforward if you think about it. We do basically what Rashi says. We do it all the time. Rashi seems to be saying, and again, this presumably, Rashi seems to be saying that there is a chiyuv midoraisa to recite Krias Shema at night, and when it comes to the chiyuv midoraisa to recite Krias Shema at night, that chiyuv has to be done after Tzeis HaKochavim. And apparently Rashi holds that chiyuv is only to recite the first parsha of Krias Shema. So Rashi is saying if you want to fulfill the doraisa chiyuv, that chiyuv can be fulfilled. With Krias Shema Lamita. You fulfilled your doraisa chiyuv of Krias Shema. Now maybe there's another chiyuv. You want to call it a chiyuv or just kedei lamod b'tefila mitoch divrei Torah. There's an additional idea, a midrabanan idea. That idea is that the person should recite Krias Shema when he's davening Ma'ariv. For that, so we daven Ma'ariv much earlier than Tzeis HaKochavim for whatever reason, don't have to get into now. But we daven Ma'ariv much earlier than Tzeis HaKochavim, and we say Krias Shema then as well, and that's what the Yerushalmi was saying. It actually seems very straightforward. So the real pella over here when we're going to learn Tosafos is that Tosafos has all these questions on Rashi when Rashi seems very straightforward. You have an obligation like we do all the time. You have an obligation to say Krias Shema on a doraisa level. You take care of that later. And you have a separate obligation that you daven Ma'ariv, and included in davening Ma'ariv is an obligation to say Krias Shema. Maybe it's D'Rabbanan or it's part of Ma'ariv, whatever the case may be. So taking a look at Tosafos over here. Tosafos says like this, MeEimasai Korin, Perish Rashi, V'anon hechi karinan mi ba'od yom, Ve'einanu mamtinin l'tzeis HaKochavim. We don't wait until Tzeis HaKochavim. How do we do that? Kedem Mefarish b'Gemara, like it says in the Gemara, meaning to wait until Tzeis HaKochavim. Al kein perish Rashi. Therefore Rashi explains Krias Shema al Hamita Iker v'hu la'achar Tzeis HaKochavim. Therefore Rashi says the Krias Shema al Hamita is the Iker, and it takes place after Tzeis HaKochavim. Now before we even see any questions that Tosafos asks on Rashi, We should note this language that Tosa says that the Krias Shema al Hamita is the Iker. That's a little bit of a strange language to use if you're talking about, if you understand Rashi the way we understood Rashi. What do I mean it's a strange language? When you say it's the Iker, the way we're understanding Rashi is there may be two totally separate obligations. You have one obligation to say on a Doraisa level. That's the, I don't know if you'd call that Iker. There's just an obligation to say Krias Shema on a Doraisa level, maybe only the first parsha. You have to say it after Tzei Sakochavim. You're Yotze with Krias Shema Lamita. You could be Yotze anytime. Any way you say Krias Shema at the proper time. That's one obligation. Then there's an additional obligation, let's say, to say Krias Shema with Ma'ariv. That could take place earlier than Tzei Sakochavim. The two obligations are basically independent of one another. You don't say that one is the Iker and one is the Tafel. The whole idea of saying it's an Iker is very strange. So we have to just pick up on that language. What's Tosa's understanding of Rashi, that he's saying that Rashi is saying the Krias Shema al Hamita is the Iker, as if you have two Krias Shemas, and one's the main Krias Shema. What does Tosas mean by that? And now Tosas continues quoting the Yerushalmi, V'hacha isa b'Yerushalmi. This is what it says in the Yerushalmi. Im kara kodem lachein lo yatze. If you read Krias Shema before Tzei Sakochavim, you're not yotze. V'im kein lamanu mispalel in Krias Shema b'beis HaKnesses. Now, if so, why do we daven Krias Shema in Shul? K'dei lamud b'tefillah mitoch divrei Torah. In order that you begin your Shemona Esrei, you begin tefillah from learning divrei Torah, the same Yerushalmi essentially that Rashi quoted. So again, noting that Tosas uses this strange language that, as if Rashi said Krias Shema al Hamita is the Iker. So now Tosas asks his questions on Rashi. So first Tosas asks, Tema leperusha. It's a wonder according to his explanation. V'halo ein ha'olam regilan likros samach l'shchiva ela parsha rishona. Doesn't the world only read, don't we only have a minhag to say the first parsha when we do Krias Shema al Hamita? V'im kain, and if what Rashi said was correct, shalosh parshias hayalo likros. You should have to read all three parshias. So already that's a little strange, because as we already know when we learned Rashi, it's very possible that the obligation on Doraisa level is only read the first parsha. Where Tosas ever see that the obligation is to read all three parshas? It's a strange kasha to begin with. But that's Tosas kasha. V'yod kasha, another difficulty. That tzarich levarich b'Kriyas Shema, shtayim lefaneo, shtayim la'achareh b'arvis. There's an obligation to make a bracha when you say Krias Shema. You have to make what we call the birchas Krias Shema. 2 brachas before and 2 brachas afterwards. Right, so we say the bracha Hamariv Aravim, Ahavas Olam, and then we say the brachas of Emes V'Emuna and the bracha of Ashkivenu. So these are brachas that you say, birchas Krias Shema. So how could Rashi say that we're not really Yotzei the mitzvahs Krias Shema when we daven Ma'ariv, but when you say the later Krias Shema, which Rashi says you bring Yotzei with, you're not saying the brachas? Once again, this is not such a difficult kasha, because, as we've already noted, it's very possible that Rashi holds there's an obligation on a Doraisa level, there's an obligation on a Derabanan level, and when you say the Birchas Krias Shema, that's the Derabanan level, the Midirabanan. You're allowed to say the Birchas Krias Shema a little earlier than Tzei Sakochavim, just like you read Krias Shema a little earlier than Tzei Sakochavim. What does that have to do with the obligation simply to recite Krias Shema on a Doraisa level that we say later? So again, also a little bit of a difficult kasha. And then Tosafot says, V'yod, another kasha, De'osa Krias Shema samach lamita eina ela b'shvil hamazikin. The Krias Shema, we say Krias Shema lamita is only because of mazikin. It's because of danger. You say it as a protection. Kedamar b'samach v'im Talmud Chacham u'eino tzarch. The Gemara even says the Talmud Chacham doesn't need to say Krias Shema lamita. So Tosafot seems to be asking, Krias Shema lamita is not an obligation, but Rashi says Krias Shema lamita is the Iker Krias Shema. Now, once again, this is premised on the fact that Rashi said Krias Shema lamita is the Iker. That's not what Rashi said. Rashi said that you can be Yotzei Krias Shema with Krias Shema lamita. There's nothing in Rashi's words that necessarily point to the fact that Krias Shema lamita is any kind of obligation. It's just if you happen to daven too early and you happen to say Krias Shema too early, you can be Yotzei with Krias Shema lamita. And then finally, Tosafot says, V'od kash, it's also difficult, Tim Kain Paskinan Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. If you're going to say that the Krias Shema lamita is the main Krias Shema, then doesn't it come out, we're paskin like Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, to Amar Tfilos be'emtza tiknum, that Shemona Esrei is really in between the 2 Krias Shemas. Perish be'emtza bein shnei Krias Shema, bein Krias Shema shel shachar, bein Krias Shema shel arvis, right? You really, if Krias Shema lamita is the Iker Krias Shema, so you say Krias Shema in the morning, you daven shachris, you say you say Ma'ariv at night, then you say Krias Shema again, Krias Shema Lamita. So you're putting the Shemona Esrei between your Krias Shemas. That follows Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Va'anon kaimelan Rabbi Yochanan to Amar Lakamon Ezu ben Olam Haba Ze Asomech Geula Shel Arvis Latfil. But don't we hold like Rabbi Yochanan that on the contrary we do Geula before Tefillah? So you say Krias Shema first, you say Geula, and then you say your Tefillah. Now, once again, this doesn't seem to be the biggest kash in the world. If you understand that Rashi holds there is two separate obligations to say Krias Shema, there's an obligation on a Doraisa level, there's an obligation on the Rabbanan level. So, on the contrary, you're saying Krias Shema earlier also. There's an obligation on the Rabbanan level with the Birchas Krias Shema, with Geula L'Tfila, Somech Geula L'Tfila, to say that when you're davening Ma'ariv, that you're doing. There's a separate obligation and nothing to do with the davening of Shemona Esrei, nothing to do with Tefillah, has to do with an obligation on a Doraisa level to say Krias Shema. Now all of these questions that I have on Tosas questions lead me to believe that Tosas already, before we even get to Tosas answers, many of the Achronim point to what I'm about to say in Tosas answers, but I think it's already clear in the Kashas this way. It seems that Tosas holds, like we find in some other Tosas throughout Shas, that the obligation to recite Krias Shema in the evening is only a D'Rabbanan obligation in the first place. There is no Doraisa obligation to recite Krias Shema at night. What about the pasuk B'shach B'cha? That seems to say there is an obligation. Maybe it's an asmachta. Whatever it is, we can look into it. But the fact seems to be that Tosas here is consistent with some other Tosas we find again in Shas. That Tosas holds that the obligation to say Krias Shema in the evening is only midrabanan. Now, once you assume that the obligation to say Krias Shema is only midrabanan, a lot of this language that Tosas uses and a lot of these questions make a lot more sense. Because what Tosas is essentially, the way that Tosas understands Rashi, because Tosas is also viewing Rashi through that framework. Now, it's possible, we'd have to go back, it's possible to look through Rashi and decide that Rashi also holds maybe D'Rabbanan. That's something to discuss, right? We presented Rashi as holding that there's a D'Rabbanan obligation and a Doraisa obligation, something to look back at. But Tosas at least seems to understand Rashi through the prism of understanding that Krias Shema is only an obligation on a D'Rabbanan level. Now, if that is the case, a lot of what Tosas says makes a lot more sense. Because what Tosas is really saying is, so what was the question then between the Krias Shema we say at Shemona Esrei by Ma'ariv and the Krias Shema we say later for Krias Shema Lamita? The question is, where was the Iker Chiyuv? Meaning, when the Rabbanan made the Chiyuv to recite Krias Shema, not a Doraisa obligation, when the Rabbanan instituted the practice to say Krias Shema, it's a little bit strange. You have a Krias Shema that you're saying by Shemona Esrei, the Rabbanan clearly, or seems to have said that you should say Krias Shema with Shemona Esrei, right? They seem to put the Birchas Krias Shema there, and all the questions that Tosas is asking. You have Birchas Krias Shema, you're saying it together with your Shemona Esrei, and then you have another Krias Shema which we say at night, which doesn't even seem to be an obligation, which you're saying, and you're not even saying the whole thing. And the one that you're saying by Ma'ariv time, when you're saying Shemona Esrei, you're saying all three parshias. So to the way that Tosas is looking at it, Tosas is saying that we have two Krias Shemas in front of us. One is the one that's part of the Shemona Esrei. You say all three parshias. You're being Somech Gula Tefila. You're saying it with the Birchas Krias Shema. That seems to be the Iker Krias Shema. It seems like that's what the Rabbanan wanted you to. That's when the Rabbanan said you have to say Krias Shema, that's the one. And the Krias Shema Lamita, that doesn't seem to be Iker at all, because it's not even an obligation. You're only saying it because of the Mazik, and Talmidei Chacham don't even need to say it, etc., etc. That makes Tosas Kashas make a lot more sense. So it seems as though Tosas is understanding that for sure the obligation to recite Krias Shema at night is only an obligation on a D'Rabbanan level. There's no Doraisa obligation. And Tosas is looking at two Krias Shemas that he has in front of him. You got this one Krias Shema Lamita, you have this other Krias Shema that you say with Ma'ariv, and Tosas says, well, which one of those two is the Iker? Which one seems to be the one that you're fulfilling the rabbinic obligation, seems to be the one you say with Ma'ariv. So that would explain what Tosas Kashas are. Now continuing, you'll see, as we see the answers of Tosas, also seems clear that might be the case. Tosas now says like this, L'chein Peirush Rabbeinu Tam. Therefore, Rabbeinu Tam explains, the Adarabba Krias Shema Shel Beis Hakneses Iker. The main Krias Shema is the one you say in Shul. And again, the way I'm understanding, what do I mean the main one? I mean the one that the Rabbanan obligated. V'im Tomer, if you're going to ask, Heich Anu Koren Kol Kach Mivod Yom. Kasha on what we do. How do we read it so early? We just finished reading here. The Mishnah says you got to read it after Tzeis HaKochavim. What are we doing that we're doing this so much earlier? So Tosafot says, very interesting. V'yesh Lomar. You can answer as follows. This is Rabbeinu Tam's answer. The Kaimalon Reb Yehuda de Amar beperk Tfilas HaShachar Dizman Tfilas Mincha Plag HaMincha. We actually hold like Reb Yehuda's opinion. So seems to be that Tosafos is saying our Mishnah doesn't really follow what we hold. We hold like Reb Yehuda. We don't hold like our Mishnah. We hold like Reb Yehuda that Mincha stops at the time of Plag HaMincha. The Hainu Echad Asar Shos Pachos Revia. That's 11 hours subtracting 1/4 of an hour into the day, so 10 3/4 of an hour into the day, that's when mincha ends. And when mincha ends, that's when Ma'ariv starts. And so, since we hold the Zman of Ma'ariv is so much earlier, that's all really part of the Zman Krias Shema as well. Again, this what we'll assume is this D'Rabbanan obligation of Krias Shema. V'yim Tomar, and so then Tosafos says, Hey Chanu, he asks, Hey Chanu mispalin tfilas mincha samach l'chashecha. So Tosafos asks, how do we daven mincha right before shkia? We daven mincha right before it gets dark. We va'afilu la'achar plag mincha. We even daven mincha after plag. So if we hold like Rabbi Yehuda that plag mincha is the time, why do we daven later? We seem to contradict. Yesh lomar. So Tosafos answers, the kaimal and k'rabbanan. So for mincha we hold like the rabbanan. The amri zvan tfilas ha-mincha ad ha'erev. They hold that mincha can go all the way up to the evening. You could do whichever way you want. So as we really hold, you could follow Rabbi Yehuda if you want. You could follow the Rabbanan if you want. So therefore, when it comes to Ma'ariv, we follow Rabbi Yehuda, and we can already start from Plag Mincha. And when it comes to Mincha, we actually hold like the Rabbanan. You can go all the way up till when it comes night, so essentially up till Shkia. So then Tosafos asks, Mikol Makam Kasha, nevertheless, it's difficult to have a Ketrei Kule, the Sasra Nahadadi. Isn't that like two leniencies that contradict one another? Sharei Me'ezet Tam Anu Mispal and Arvis, Miad Lachar Plaga Mincha, Mishum the Kaimalon, the Shas HaMincha Kala Kediv Rabbi Yehuda. On the one hand, we're davening Ma'ariv right away early because we hold like Rabbi Yehuda. Miad have Isman Arvis, it's already Ma'ariv time. Isman Atfila Atzma, Lo Kaimalon Rabbi Yehuda, Lo Krabbanan. But yet, when it comes to davening itself, so we daven Ma'ariv early, but when it comes to Mincha, we hold like the Rabbanan. You can go even much later. So even from this, even from Rabbeinu Tam, just forgetting for a moment the question that Tosafos asked on Rabbeinu Tam, that it seems what we call a Tardi Desasri, that for Mincha you're holding like one opinion, for Ma'ariv you're holding like another opinion. But it seems, why are we being so lenient over here? If Krias Shema was an obligation on a Doraisa level, we're going to start saying, oh yeah, you could be lenient like the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, Plaga Mincha, and do it early. Why would we take such a lenient opinion? Another raya, it seems to be, that Krias Shema is only midrabanan. The whole reason we're lenient, the whole reason we say da'avid kamar avid or da'avid kamar avid, is because of the leniency of Ma'ariv, that it's a reshus, or at the very least the davening, or maybe even that it's just da'rabanan, whatever the case is. But that's why we're lenient. Presumably we wouldn't be so lenient on an obligation on a doraisa level. So already from Rabbeinu Tam also you see that Krias Shema seems to be only on a derabanan level. You'll see this in the Ri as well. The Ri gives a different answer. Al-Kain Omer Ri, and he says, therefore, since the Ri doesn't like the Tardi Desasri, so the Ri says, Devadai Krias Shema shel beis hakneses ikr. Certainly the Krias Shema that one says in Shul is the ikr, so the Ri is agreeing with that premise of Tosafos. V'anu shemispalin arvis mi ba'od yom. Now, what do? We daven Ma'ariv so early, and we're not going to hold like Rabbi Yehuda, because he's not going to take this Tardi Desasri answer. So he gives a different answer. Svirolon kahani tanoi de Gemara. We hold like the other Tanoim in the Gemara. We're going to see on Daf Beis Amid Beis. There's many different opinions that argue with our Mishnah when the Zman Krias Shema actually starts. The Amri Mishosh Shekidesh Hayom, V'gam Mishosh B'nei Adam Nechnasim Lahasiv, the Hainu Sudas Erev Shabbos, V'hi Oisami Ba'od Yom. Different opinions, either the time when it's Kiddush Hayom or the time when people come to eat. Sudas Erev Shabbos. These are all times Mi Ba'od Yom. It's before nightfall. Umeosa Shah Haviz Man Tefillah. From that time is the time of Tefillah. And meaning, and that's a chiddush over here. In other words, it's not that we're davening early from Plag like Rabbi Yehuda, but there's other shitas, and those shitas that we're going to see later that have earlier Zmanei Krias Shema are also Zmanei Tefillah. They're Zmanim for Ma'ariv, and so we hold like those opinions. So essentially, Tosafos' answer, regardless of whether it's Rabbeinu Tam or the Ri, it's that we hold like a different Tana. Either we hold like Rabbi Yehuda Plag Mincha, or we hold like these other Tanoim on Daf Beis Amid Beis, but we do not hold like our Mishnah. That's essentially what the answer is. V'gam Raya, and now Tosafos says we can also bring a proof. This next line over here, exactly what Tosafos is proving, is a little bit difficult, but Tosafos says V'gam Raya, it's also a proof. The Rav have imatzli shel Shabbos be'erev Shabbos. It says Rav used to daven early. Mistama gam hayakore Krias Shema. Mistama, he also read Krias Shema. Now the difficulty with this line is that everybody agreed, even Rashi has, that there's reading Krias Shema early and there's davening early. That wasn't really part of the argument. So what's the raya that Rav used to daven the Shabbos davening on Erev Shabbos, and Mistama used to read Krias Shema at that time? That's everybody. That wasn't the discussion. Wasn't whether people daven Ma'ariv early and whether to say Krias Shema. It's whether you say the mitzvah at that point in time. Whether that's the Ikr Krias Shema. So exactly what the raya is, they discuss in the Achronim. The Maharsha talks about this, and there's a slightly different girsa in the Rosh exactly what this raya is. But we're gonna put that off for the moment. And Tosafot says, Mikol Osan Harayos. Tosafot says, from all of these rayas, Mashma de Krias Shema shal Beis HaKnesses hi Ikr. The implication is that Krias Shema that takes place in Shul is the main Krias Shema. So now Tosafot just needs to come back to this Yerushalmi, because at the end of the day, the Yerushalmi was asking our Mishnah. So it said in the Yerushalmi, "V'had dekamer b'Yerushalmi lama yekar Beis HaKnesses v'chulu." The whole thing with the Yerushalmi, where it says, what are they reading early in Shul? Remember, because according to the Yerushalmi is going on the Mishnah. Tosafot's whole answer is we don't hold like the Mishnah, but the Yerushalmi is going on the Mishnah and asking why did they say Shema early. So Omer Rabbeinu Tam shayu regilin likros Krias Shema kodem tfilasam k'moshan uregilin lomar ashrei techila. So Rabbeinu Tam says that Yerushalmi is talking about they had a different custom, nothing to do with holding like the Tanaim that we hold like. That was talking about there was a custom to say Krias Shema before Tefillah, just like we say Ashrei before Mincha. So a similar idea, they say Krias Shema before, that had nothing to do with what we do, which is davening the entire davening early with the Birchas Krias Shema and everything. That we do because we hold it's actually the Zman of Tefillah. In other words, we hold that's actually the Zman Ma'ariv. We say Birchas Krias Shema, the full Krias Shema, we daven Shemon Esrei, we're davening Ma'ariv at that time. But in the Yerushalmi, they're not going by. They're assuming you're doing everything very early, essentially before the Zman. So that was a different reciting of Krias Shema. There, they didn't do it with the Birchas Krias Shema. They weren't being Yotzei Krias Shema, according to the Yerushalmi. They were just saying Krias Shema like we say Ashrei before davening. V'yosa Krias Shema eina elo lamod b'tefillah mitoch divrei Torah. That Krias Shema was just to have tefillah mitoch divrei Torah. That has really no connection with what we do nowadays, is what Tosafot is saying. Umikan nira mishakore Krias Shema al mitaso. Then Tosafot concludes and says, from here it appears that somebody who does read Krias Shema al amita she'ein levarech, he shouldn't make a brach on that. V'gam eino tzarech likros ela parsha rishona. He only needs to recite the first parsha, because you really Krias Shema al amita is not the Ikr Krias Shema, going back to Tosafot's language, and it's not the you're not fulfilling your obligation. Again, let's assume the Rabbanan obligation of Krias Shema, and therefore there is no bracha. We'll take a look at a couple other mefarshim here just to conclude this shiur. First of all, it's kedai to take a look here at the Rabbeinu Channanel. Rabbeinu Channanel says very interesting. Rabbeinu Channanel here, right at the beginning, MeEimasai korban Shema va'arvin mishash hakarim nechnasen lecho b'trumasan dekaim olon de Krias Shema b'shas tzeis hakochavim. So he says we hold Krias Shema from tzeis. So first, interesting that he says Kaimalon, already different than Tosafot, who seems to say that we don't hold like this. And in contrast, the Rabbeinu Channanel saying we do hold like this Mishnah, that Krias Shema is from Tzeis HaKochavim. Now he quotes the Yerushalmi, of Yerushalmi b'tchilas Meseches Tani hakori kodem l'chein lo yatzi de chovasum kein la makoros of Beis HaKnesses Amar Rabbi Yossi and Kornas b'shvil shehi chova. We don't read it as an obligation. Ela kedei lamud b'tefillah mitoch divrei Torah. And he says, "L'divrei Yerushalmi masnisin de brachos b'Kriyas Shema sha'al mitaso." Very interesting, Rabbeinu Channanel. He says, according to the Yerushalmi, our Mishnah in brachos is talking about Kriyas Shema Lamita. So, in other words, according to the way the Yerushalmi understands our Mishnah, when the Mishnah says MeEimasai Koren, it's talking about Kriyas Shema Lamita. Shenemar imru vilvavchem v'gomer, like it says imru vilvavchem. Apparently. Now, first of all, Imru V'Vavchem is not a pasuk in the Torah; it's a pasuk in Navi. So Imru V'Vavchem can't be an obligation to Oraisa, certainly, to say Krias Shema. Apparently, the Rabbeinu Channanel holds that saying Krias Shema Lamita is an obligation mid'Rabbanan. He learned out from the pasuk of Imru V'Vavchem. From that pasuk of Imru V'Vavchem, there's an obligation mid'Rabbanan to say Krias Shema Lamita, and that's what we're talking about here. The Korei al Mitaso Parsha Shema Uvahoya Im Shamoa Tishmu. You should read both parshios, the parsha of Shema, you have to end V'haya. Zulazi parshas tzitzis. You don't have to read tzitzis. Shein zman tzitzis b'layla, because there's no zman tzitzis b'layla. And he says, continues, V'alosa kriya nemar shimnenes b'sheina in makitzan osol pasuk rishon, kedei likros kriya Shema b'zmano. if the person's sleeping, you don't wake him up except just to recite the first pasuk. Uchvar hizkir yitzias Mitzrayim uverich birchas shel Krias Shema v'Beis HaKnesses v'yotzi bahem v'afilu mibod yom k'moshen nispar b'perek Tfilas HaShachar. He says you've already been Yotzei Yitzias Mitzrayim, you've already done the Birchas Krias Shema earlier, that you could be Yotzei Miba'od Yom. So Rabbeinu Channanel seems very similar to Rashi with a couple of changes. First of all, Rabbeinu Channanel seems to be saying that our Mishnah is talking about Krias Shema Lamita, which is a D'Rabbanan obligation. That's in direct argument with Tosafos, who says Krias Shema Lamita is not an obligation at all. He understands Yerushalmi saying it is an obligation. That's Rabbeinu Channanel. Number two, different than Rashi, Rabbeinu Channanel understands that you're saying Krias Shema Lamita with the first two parshias. So apparently you're being Yotzei, this D'Rabbanan obligation of Krias Shema, by reciting two parshias of Krias Shema. Also interesting, he seems to say that if you fell asleep, you would be woken up just to say the Pasuk Rishon. So the Pasuk Rishon, there does seem to be some Doraisa obligation here, right? The issue that's at hand is the D'Rabbanan obligation. That's the issue that's being discussed in our Mishnah. That's Krias Shema Lamita, D'Rabbanan obligation, the first two parshias. There is an additional presumably Doraisa, or at least stricter, but presumably Doraisa obligation of just saying just the first pasuk, that Rabbeinu Channanel acknowledges. And again, it's possible Rashi agrees with parts of what Rabbeinu Channanel is saying here. And then he makes it clear that the Birchas Krias Shema, Yitzias Mitzrayim, all those things, that's a separate obligation that you're allowed to do, even Miba'od Yom. So Rabbeinu Channanel is definitely in Rashi's camp on a number of these issues. You have to know exactly how much Rashi agrees or disagrees with on these points. And now I just want to make a couple more points. I'm going to read now from the Rosh. I don't have the Rosh, the text of the Rosh here inside on the screen, but I'm just going to read it. First of all, the Rosh quotes, this is the very first Rosh in the Masechta. The Rosh says, quoting, he starts off, he quotes Rashi, and he says, V'chein kasav hariva v'aritz geyes zal, v'chein kasav Rav Amram zal, shetzarich levarich asher kedeshana mitzvos v'tzivanu al Krias Shema, person needs to say, when a person's saying Krias Shema al Amita, the person needs to say a bracha, birchas hamitzvos asher kedeshana mitzvos v'tzivanu al Krias Shema. He says, mitoch divrei mashma sha'adam yotzi yedei chovas mitoch osa kriya. That's how he understands. So, meaning within the sheet of Rashi, that Krias Shema, you're being yotzei, the mitzvah, the obligation of Krias Shema with Krias Shema Lamita, he says a person should say Asher Krias Shema mitzvos v'tzivanu al mitzvahs Krias Shema. That's interesting because when we say Krias Shema at Ma'ariv time, there's no bracha like that. You just say the regular birchas Krias Shema. So in reference to this, I did see brought down in the Igros HaGrid, this is in Perek Aleph of Hilchas Shvuas Halacha Yud Gimel, he quotes this Rav Amram. Rav Amram going sover the v'kori Krias Shema bebeso yisei Asher kedeshana mitzvos v'tzivanu ayin b'rosh. And he says, Uchafi hanira shitaso, he says it seems that his opinion is Te'ika al Krias Shema birchas hamitzvos gam kein kemoshar mitzvos. There's a din of a birchas hamitzvos on Krias Shema. Ma she'ein kein ella de lo niskana birchas hamitzvos bizman de'ika birchas Krias Shema. But there was no takana to say this birchas hamitzvos if you're already saying birchas Krias Shema. Ma she'ein kein keshekara habrachas bebeis haknesses v'lo yatsa oz yidei chovas Krias Shema. So if the person is reading the birchas Krias Shema and shul, and he's not being yotzei the chiv of Krias Shema v'kori Krias Shema v'so ika habracha shel asher kiddushanu. Then there is this bracha of asher kiddushanu. So essentially, the way he understands this Rav Amram going is, there really should be birchas hamitzvos when it comes to Krias Shema, and we just don't always do it because you have the birchas Krias Shema. Now this is in the context of a much larger discussion that the Igros HaGrid here is having regarding whether birchas Krias Shema are birchas hamitzvah at all or not. And again, you can see that whole discussion, and it's a little bit of a separate discussion in Perek Aleph of Hilchas Shvuas Halacha Yud Gimel. Now the last thing I want to point out over here is specifically in reference to the question of Tardi de Sasri that's asked, the re-asks against Rabbeinu Tam. So again, there's Igros HaGrid discusses this as well, and it's in reference. This is found in Hilchas Tefillah, Perek Gimel Halacha Dalet in the Rambam in Igros HaGrid, and here it is. Here's the Rambam. The Rambam says here, Halamanata shazman mincha gedola misheishos umechza ad teisho mechza. He tells you there's man mincha gedola, uzman mincha getana mitesha umechza ad sheishar min hayom shah uravia. So he seems to paskin, or he seems to say that the zman of mincha goes until Plaga Mincha, like Rabbi Yehuda says, but then he says, "V'yesh lo l'spalo sa'at shetishka chama." But you really could daven in until Shkia, even though we really hold Plag HaMincha, you have the ability to daven until Shkia. And then he says, he continues, when it comes to Ma'ariv, v'yesh lo lehispala, this is an halacha zayin, a person can daven tfilas arvis shel leile Shabbos be'erev Shabbos kodem shetishkach shemesh. You can daven Ma'ariv before Shkia. V'chein v'spalal arvis shel Matzai Shabbos b'Shabbos. Same thing when it comes to Matzai Shabbos, you can daven it early. Lefisha tfilas arvis rishus ein medaktik in bizmana. Because Ma'ariv is only rishus, we're not so medaktik in its zman. So it's very interesting because on the one hand, he tells you that when it comes to Mincha, the Zman seems to end at Plag, but really you could go until Shkia. And there, of course, you don't have the idea that Mincha is a Rishus because it's not a Rishus. And then when it comes to Ma'ariv, the Rambam resorts to Tfilas Arvis Rishus, saying you can daven early, an early Ma'ariv. So the Rambam, number one, does seem to have no problem, or does not seem to have a problem, I should say, seems to have no problem at all with having this Tardi Desasri of davening Mincha up until Shkia, but still davening Ma'ariv before Shkia, davening Ma'ariv essentially after Plag. He has no problem with that. And number two, what's going on over here when the Rambam is talking about Ma'ariv being a Rishus? And then when it comes to Mincha, yesh lo lehispalel, you could even daven until Shkia. What's going on with the language of the Rambam? So this, again, Soloveitchik addresses in the Igros HaGrid. And so reading from the Igros HaGrid, he says as follows, just makes the following suggestion. He says, V'hinei im harambam achein posek Rabbi Yehuda. If the Rambam is indeed paskening like Rabbi Yehuda, nearer the Harambam sover, to v'nogei al zman tefila yesh chiluk ben hamechayev shel tefila levein kiyum hatefila. There seems to be a difference between the mechayev of davening and the actual kiyum of davening. Those two zmanim don't really have to coincide. Sometimes the time of the mechayev can be different from the time of the kiyum hatfila. So essentially what he's suggesting there is that when Plag HaMincha, up until the time of Plag HaMincha, that's really the end of your Zman of Mincha in terms of the Mechayev of Mincha, but you can still be Mekayim that obligation, you can still fulfill the obligation a little bit later all the way through Shkia Sachama. So the Mechayev would end at Plag, and the Kiyum would go all the way until Shkia. Then he continues, skipping a couple paragraphs just to get the idea. He says, "V'inei mashik asafti de ba'arvis hamechayev hushkia sacham." Now, according to what he's saying, he says that by Ma'ariv it comes out again. According to what the Rambam said, a person can even daven Ma'ariv before Shkia. So we're going to say that the mechayev of Ma'ariv is Shkia sacham v'kiyuma maschil mi Plag HaMincha. But when it comes to Ma'ariv, you're being mekayim early. You're starting from Plag HaMincha l'choret tzarachi. And how does that work? He says, I understand when it comes to Mincha, if you're going to say the Mechayev is a little earlier, you can always say, okay, the Mechayev came before Plag, but you can be Mekayim it all the way up until Shki. You could say such a thing. That works. But by Ma'ariv, what are we going to say? By Ma'ariv, you're davening early, you haven't even been Mechayev yet in Ma'ariv. How could the Kiyum come before the Mechayev? You can't have kiyum without mechayev. So he says as follows: Baram ein ze soseres devoreno. It doesn't necessarily contradict. B'yishuv shitas Rambam. Da'af im neimod ha'mechayev shel arvis maschel min Plag HaMincha. Even if we were to say that the mechayev of Ma'ariv began at Plag, mikol mokom ha'mechayev shel mincha yachol lios rak ad Plag HaMincha. You can still say that the mechayev of Mincha could be also until Plag. It wouldn't be any problem. In other words, first he's suggesting, well, let's say simply, one possible answer is the Mechayev of both comes by Plag HaMincha. The Mechayev of Mincha is until Plag. The Mechayev of Ma'ariv starts after Plag. And then when it comes to Kiyum, it's a little bit different. When it comes to Kiyum, obviously the Kiyum of Ma'ariv can take place immediately after Plag. That's where the Mechayev is. When it comes to Mincha, the Kiyum also gets extended a little beyond. You don't really have any Tardi Desasri, and the Mechayev is always Plag. But then he gives another explanation. Baram yesh lamor. You could also say maybe that's what the Rambam means when he says Ma'ariv is only reshus, so we don't care so much about the zman. Meaning, when it comes to Ma'ariv, because tfilas arvis is a reshus, you don't need to have a mechayev to be mekayim it. Ulefikach yachol espal arvis mi plaga mincha after mechayev maschel mishkia sachama. You could even say that the mechayev of ma'ariv is shkia, but you're already being mekayim it earlier plaga mincha. Okay, so in any case, you don't have to get stuck too much in the details over here, but the way that the Rav is coming to get around the issue of Tardi Desasri is essentially he's making a distinction between what Zman is Mechayev the Tefillah and when the Kiyum is going to be. That's why it's possible to say that in the same exact time period, you can be Mekayim both Mincha and Ma'ariv, because that's not a Tardi Desasri if the Chiyuv is at the same time. In other words, if you were to say that Plaga Mincha is the end of the day, so Plaga Mincha becomes the Mechayev, the end of the Mechayev of Mincha, the beginning of the Mechayev of Ma'ariv, that doesn't necessarily contradict when you're Mekayim. You can be Mekayim both of them, let's say after Plag, before Shkia. That's between Plag and Shkia. That is a possibility. And again, also with the idea that Ma'ariv is a Reshus, maybe that's exactly what the Rambam is saying. If you want to go the other way, maybe really the Mechayev's at Shkia for Ma'ariv, but you could be Mekayim it a little early, because the Kiyum's allowed to be before the Mechayev when it comes to Ma'ariv. That's another possible way of reading the Rambam. A couple of ways to go over there, but that's just a direction of how you can get out of the issue of Tardi Desasri. And again, that concludes our short shiur here on the Machlokes Rashi and Tosafos when it comes to the obligation of Krias Shema. Is the Iker, or what we mean by that, but is the Iker Krias Shema, or is the Krias Shema we're talking about in the Mishnah, is that the Krias Shema we say with Ma'ariv? Is it the Krias Shema we say Krias Shema Lamita? And again, also ties into whether the obligation to say Krias Shema at night is a Chiyuv Midrabanan or a Chiyuv Midoraisa.